Good morning, everyone. This morning is Saturday, January 27th, 2018. We welcome you to our Saturday morning Bible study, and we are recording today from the Plainfield Christian Science Church, Plainfield, New Jersey. Before we get started, I just wanted to announce from now on, those moderators, experienced moderators, no longer have to go through checking their questions with Linda and Tom unless they want to. If we talked last week about the importance of demonstrating our positions, and we've all been tried and true and tested, learned humility and other things doing this. So now, if you feel comfortable writing questions without anyone checking your questions, that's perfectly fine. We have guidelines online that you can check. Now, if you would like Tom and Linda to go over them, that's perfectly fine too, and you can either follow their suggestions or not. But this is different for those people who are doing this for the first time, who are moderating a Bible study for the first time. Those people will be required at first to. Okay, any questions on that or comments?
I just want to add, this is Linda, that you'll still send them to me because I post them, but you're not sending them necessarily for a suggestion unless you ask.
Yes. Thank you. Send them to Linda to post. Demonstrate it if you feel comfortable, peaceful about what you've come up with, and send them to Linda. As I said, if you want any suggestions, that's perfectly fine too. Okay, so that will be going forward. Thank you all. Go ahead, Mike.
I just want to say they earned a little bit of help there, a lot of help.
I'm sure they are. That's why they're there, and we've been very, very grateful for their. We thank Linda and Tom have been doing and will continue to do. Make this Bible study of the highest caliber standard, God's standard, as possible.
Tom has been helping out for many, many years. In fact, it was Tom's suggestion that we have these Bible study sessions in the first place. So you're right, Mike. We're very grateful.
Yes, we are endlessly grateful for this help. All right, then we will start now with Jeremy from New Jersey as this week's moderator.
Okay, thank you. This quote is from Miscellaneous Documents by Gilbert Carpenter. Quote, Mrs. Eddy cautions her students not to fall into the habit of spiritualizing everything in the Bible. It has its historical features, and these must be considered as historical only. If we attempt to spiritualize its history, we shall confuse its meaning and lessons. The children of Israel walked through the Red Sea. This is as much a matter of fact as that we are seated in this classroom. Adam and Eve were no less real to sense than are we. The history in the Bible must be accepted as literally as any other history. End quote.
Thank you.
Why did she say this?
Well, what I got from it is it's important to know that, real people went through these things. All these Bible studies we have, it's actually affected people, and they had to overcome these obstacles. I think it's important to remember that.
Absolutely. Because what does mortal mind say about these?
It didn't really happen.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, it's something we can do.
Yes. Mainly, it didn't. It's just a story. It's just.
There are those who think that a lot of the Bible is just myth.
Well, they didn't think that about Jesus, did they?
Some people do.
Sure.
Well.
Really?
Yeah, some people think that. They think that Paul was real, but Jesus wasn't, People think all sorts of things. I really like this. Thank you, Jeremy. We've talked about before that the CS in Christian Science stands for common sense. This is one of the things I get from that is we need to be very practical. That's what Christian scientists are supposed to be. I think that's an area where Christian scientists they get misled, and they just lose all sense of common sense. And when they study the Bible, if they study the Bible, they only do it from the spiritual position point of view. And when I was a kid, I used to be told, that Mary Baker Eddy said once that, don't have your head in the clouds and your body riddled with bullets, Another story I was told was someone in her class was being so spiritually high-minded, and she said to the woman, okay, well, please, next time you come to class, don't take the train to come here. I just want you to be here. So spiritually minded.
That's true. They get very much so. We're just all so spiritual and not at all practical, not using common sense, and that is not Christian Science.
And on the sorry.
Go ahead.
On the other hand, sometimes people take the Bible way too literally in its meaning, and that's not you have to have both. Know which one's which.
Right. How you get the idea of a wrathful God that's going to come, send lightning and kill you when you take it too literally. Who's trying to speak?
Well, I was thinking about making it practical. This is one thing that I love that is added to our service on Sunday. The testimonies are read from the fruitage in Science and Health. It shows the proof of this truth, of this work. And when you apply it, when you really work to understand it and apply it, it is practical. People can't deny the fruits of it.
Yes, and this is what should be first and foremost. Perhaps you remember several weeks had contacted our church who had known Gary many, many years ago when Gary attended the Christian Science Branch Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we met with him. He had some interesting stories to tell because he had worked at the Publishing Society for many years. He also had worked at the Pleasant View, or it was after they destroyed Pleasant View and built something. But he also sought out Adelaide Still before she had passed on, and maybe you remember her, Adelaide Still, home, and who also had stayed at Chestnut Hill after Mrs. Eddy passed. And he said he found her in a small apartment across from the once beautiful park that the other church extension once had before they met. And he met with her, and he said that he was expecting perhaps to hear some stories about Mrs. Eddy, about the wonderful miracles and all the healing she'd done. But instead, over and over, she talked about Mrs. Eddy's humanity and also her practicality, how down to earth she was. Just what Tom was talking about. That's how she was. That's why it's important to have an example. That's how Mrs. Evans was. She was very down to earth. Otherwise, you get otherworldly, we call it, and that is not Christian Science. So I thought that was a beautiful story. I think some of his recollections and things he has said, perhaps we can publish. So go ahead now.
Oh, I'd like to say something. I think it's Mrs. Evans, how practical she was, the stories of her own life that she told that made this science really mean something that I can do for me when I started to listen into the classes here. It was so, it's like finally there's some way so practical that I can use this. I'm very, very grateful for that.
So true.
Thank you, Florence. I think that's what we all found when science, when properly lived, is totally 100% practical. And if it's not, you're not practicing it right.
You know, she had a great sense of humor. She enjoyed life. She loved people. There was nothing weird about her. And frankly, I had met some people that were sort of weird. So-called Christian Scientists, you'd feel uncomfortable with them, like you might say something or do something or cough or sneeze or, and it was just going to be not good. So anyway, the practicality of science is most important. Otherwise, it's a big turnoff. So good quote, Jeremy.
I would also add the importance of just history itself, because if you don't keep track of your history, then others can rewrite it for you or rewrite it for others, and then you lose that very important information.
It's exactly true, and that's exactly what's happening. Tom from New York noticing that, right, Tom? They destroy buildings, they're destroying everything within the movement, as well as the history of our country. It's part of the tactic of so-called enemy.
Well, that's right. And if I may, I sent you that email yesterday, but many years ago, my grandmother was just extraordinarily upset at some property in Boston that the church sold. And I was just a kid. I didn't know what it was all about, except that I remember that she was really, really upset. So I was looking at her book yesterday, and I saw a picture. Now, I could be wrong, but the picture really looked like the photos that my grandmother showed me. And the interesting thing I noticed on that was that it was a picture of a townhouse that Mary Baker Eddy had lived in. So that kind of hit me, and that maybe that's why my grandmother was so upset. It wasn't just some real estate being sold, but this was a place where Mary Baker Eddy had lived once.
And yes, if you read Chapter 1910 by Andrew Hart, just the first few chapters, what they did, the BOD, boom, 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 destroying everything, right, left, and sideways. Initially, this is what did go on. It still is going on. The DVD made by Longyear, the last one on Chestnut Hill, it was very, very interesting to me because there is a quote in there where Mrs. Eddy, it was after she wrote First Church of Christ Scientists Miscellany, which I have been very much attracted to reading it over and over for some reason. And a lot of that is about the building of the extension, all the symbolism, all the work, all the demonstration that went into it. Well, anyway, what she said on this DVD was, next to Science and Health, my book, First Church of Christ Scientists Miscellany, will do more for Christian Scientists than any of my other writings. And I found that extremely interesting. And you can read it for yourself and ask yourself, why is this true? Some of it, I think, is because of her going over this church, which perhaps she knew it would fall into the hands that it's fallen into. This is why we must do work for it. This all goes hand in hand with what we're talking about today, and also about the remnant. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Today's topic is the remnant, and the first question is, who was Elijah? What led him into hiding?
Well, Elijah was the prophet of fire. He was well known for that, and they didn't really get into a lot of history other than he was Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead. But the story that led him into hiding was after proving that God was the God by fire who ate up, who came down and burnt up the offering, and he slew the 450 prophets of Baal. They had that contest, which God would come down and consume their offering by fire, and God proved himself, and then he killed the prophets, and then they went after him. And there's a lot more to that.
Elijah is also one of the figures I would describe at the Transfiguration before Christ Jesus ascended.
I read that he was the miracle worker in that time.
Yeah, he was probably the most respected, most revered prophet. And in those days, we read recently that prophets were more important than the king. They didn't report to anybody but God. And Ahab was, he was, what was he, killing, putting into prison all of the Lord's prophets and promoting Baal's prophets because of his wife.
And she's the one who was going to go after Elijah's life.
Yeah, I'd like someone to read what Parthens wrote on the.
All right, I have it.
Thank you.
This is Parthens. The falling away of Judah from the rulership of spirit began with Solomon, whose desire for human political harmony caused him to take many wives from the godless nations surrounding Judah. The process of falling away accelerated with King Ahab's marriage to the authoritarian Phoenician princess Jezebel, in a similar attempt to create a multicultural paradise apart from God. Jezebel was steeped in Baal worship, which, along with associated gods, eventually became the ruling deity in Judah. She actively pursued evangelizing Judah with the worship of her beloved Baal. There is no better example of the consequences of misguided tolerance for religious multiculturalism than this cautionary tale of Ahab's off-centered attempt to mix matter with spirit, his fateful marriage of convenience to Jezebel. And then he quotes from Revelation 2:20, quote, "Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest, you tolerate, that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols." End quote. And that's the end of the forum post.
Comments?
Well, I think that key to tolerating is a huge deal to our time period also. This whole concept that there's more than one way to find your spiritual path. And that is without really God or Christ.
Thank you.
And the falling away, if you just allow a little bit in, and then it can just spread. Like this is what happened over 100 years since the time of King David with Ahab and Jezebel.
When you compare that with the story we had last week about pitching the ark, in other words, preserving the purity of the science, think about all the effort they went to try to tolerate and give everybody a chance and bring in whatever they have to offer without any regard to right and wrong. It's quite a contrast.
This is an extremely important point and one that gets very convoluted because, but being loving does not mean we tolerate. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. To me, one of the most profound things we have to do in our church is to keep its purity. the purity of Christian Science as best that we can and not pollute it. And it will become polluted if
How could we pollute it? How could it become?
Pride is tolerated.
It's polluted, and the mother church has become polluted.
Yeah, and how did that happen?
I think by also kind of blending or accepting their own thoughts and their own ideas and just thinking it's okay. Like, just kind of an example at work, you hear the different, I know we have a rule that, you have to respect other religions and so forth and so on, but to the point that, you kind of have to maybe agree kind of with what's going on and goes against what you believe, what you know that is right based on the Bible and Mrs. Eddy's writings and what you learn in Christian Science. So it's just that blend tolerance that can put you in a kind of soporific state of mind.
Very true.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Which what happened to the religion when Jesus came. I mean, he was always talking about the hypocrisy, the praying in public. It became just a sort of a way of life, but it wasn't the worship of God.
Yeah, and another way that it could become polluted is if we fail to respect Mrs. Eddy's place in Bible prophecy and the significance of what she has given the world. If we refer to her as just another spiritual leader.
Right, and that's what we've been talking about, and that's what our Liberator, the most recent one, is about. But the main thing, we've talked about this too. If you know the real thing, you will not be confused by the counterfeit. The reason things get polluted is because people don't know the real thing, and so then they accept the counterfeit. If someone tells them it's true, you've got to know what is really the science. And that is why we do what we do week after week after week, to keep our purity, to keep our clarity, so we will not be fooled. And if we are not fooled, if someone does try, we can see right through it, and they know it. Error knows. When you know that there's error around, that error will know it, and it will either change or it will leave. That's how we keep our purity. It's up to each one of us to be as pure as we can be and to understand this science to the best of our ability, to study our textbook, not just look at it occasionally, to study the Bible, to study prose works until we are it.
And then error is a coward before that truth. Mrs. Eddy says, pure are at peace with what?
The impure.
Impure.
Exactly. The impure is not at peace with the pure. Can't stand it.
Hitler knew that Churchill knew what he was. Hitler knew that, and Hitler was afraid of Churchill. He wasn't afraid of anybody else because of could be so charming, he deceived people up to a point. But Churchill knew what and who he was, and because of that, Hitler feared him. That's how we must be. We have to be formidable in the truth, so that error is afraid of us. And there's only one way to do it, and that is to do it, and to be it, and to know it, to love it, to cherish it, and live it. And then we're okay. Once we get, as Pilar described, soporific and sleepy and not caring and everything's wonderful, then we lose it. I read with Jezebel that she was addicted to witchcraft. So was Hitler.
I had an experience with the practitioner that I started out with, because it seemed to me that it was like personal worship around her. And I mean, when we went to class for those 2 weeks, everything was sort of white in her fancy apartment. And I took some beautiful spring flowers to her about the second week, and she gave them away. And then later on, I've heard that she set up a reading room in one of her students' apartments because they didn't want to go to the reading room anymore. So it became like personal worship of her.
That's something to be very, very careful about. Mrs. Eddy wouldn't allow it. So, again...
It was shocking.
Well, and you see, too, the spiritually minded and the pure in heart, that sort of thing is shocking. And it should be shocking. But here again are all these nuances where, you know, we recognize who and what Mrs. Eddy is and was, but yet we don't worship her. And where we love everyone, all of God's children, and yet we do not tolerate evil. These are important nuances because if you just love everyone and tolerate evil, you've lost the ball game. And if you respect Mrs. Eddy and then you start to worship her and personalize her, again, you've lost the ball game. It's the difference between the divine sense and understanding of things and the human. And that's why we have to stay out of the human, to stay alert and awake to it. So, this is what happened. Elijah, why he went into hiding. He was fearing for his life. And, you know, think, too, about the courage it took. Think of the courage it took for him to stand up against the prophets of Baal and to have a showdown like that. And you, in your own life, you should be having these spiritual showdowns in your own life every day. Because Era's going to try to boss you around and tell you it's king, prophet of Baal is the king, and you're just a little worm and you don't know your science and Christian Science doesn't work and all this other stuff. Those are your showdowns, your daily showdowns that you've got to stand up to. You understand this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So this is not some far-off story that does not relate. It relates. Believe me, it relates. And it's more and more so as the materia medica grows bigger. I was getting the feeling someday, I'm not sure when or how or who, there will be perhaps a showdown, just as it was with Elijah. Who are you going to worship? Someone was telling me all about this artificial intelligence, all of this human mind taking lead. There will be a showdown, and we have to be prepared for it, and we are prepared for it by meeting it in our own thinking day by day, and by giving this truth out to as many people as possible, planting seeds, because whenever this showdown happens, whoever, whenever, they're going to have to be prepared. And we are doing that groundwork. Who knows? It might even be us, but I don't know. It's us on a day-to-day basis. That I do know.
I think this is why, all the articles that tell us to encourage ourselves, watch what we are telling ourselves. What truth are we, telling ourselves, or are we listening to, oh, you're no good, you're not worth this, why should you even be here, and all these things that come. That is the daily work that prepares us for when, if it comes in our time here, to be ready.
That's exactly right. Thank you. That daily work. So when you give in to those stupid thoughts and think you're no good or you should kill yourself or this or that, you're being a weakling. You're not loving God. You're loving yourself more than God. You've got to rise in rebellion against it. Work with those 390 to 393 statements let error boss you around or intimidate you ever. Work this science.
I think it's like having a daily, to prepare yourself daily, mentally, whether it's you're going, you're at home or you're going to work every day, that you're going to be bombarded by all these erroneous beliefs or thoughts that will try to influence you to away from science, and that will so it is, and thank you for mentioning before that about having to prepare yourself and day by day, because I feel that's what I have to do in my own particular instance, to every day go in there and just mentally have my guards, so to speak, at the wall, to make sure that there's no erroneous influence coming in that will make me doubt science or what I've been learning.
Thank you. That's right. And for God's sakes, do not take a Jezebel to your bosom. And what do I mean by that? Left you speechless.
One who willfully opposes, selfishly and stubbornly opposes the truth.
Yes.
Or on a larger scale, anything that would draw you from what you're following.
I think one of the...
Even if it lives in your own, you can love it from a distance, but you don't take it into your soup.
And you have to separate.
Yeah, you have
Absolutely.
to separate you do whatever you need to do, certainly in the case of a Jezebel. And, these are types of thoughts. Jezebel is a type of thought. Delilah is a type of thought. I love to refer to people as that.
I think one of the very important things is that Elijah followed the rules of God, and we're very fortunate to have him, Christ Jesus, Mary Baker Eddy, and we have to follow all the rules. One of the things that I was taught in class was that we had to follow all of Mrs. Eddy's rules. What was really fascinating was that my teacher had been disbarred from and thrown out of the mother church, but she wasn't following that rule. And the most startling revelation came a couple of weeks ago when Gary brought up the fact that teachers were part of the estoppel clause, that they couldn't be teaching without Mrs. Eddy's signing their certificate for being a teacher. So that means every teacher today is, that's one of the rules that's not being followed. So my teacher was excellent as far as Mrs. Eddy's place, and I always relied on that, and I always swept the other stuff under the rug, but I could never practice Christian Science efficiently. I would go to class, I would go to the association things, come home euphoric, and a couple of weeks later I couldn't do anything. I could never figure it out, and I really blamed myself. And now I realize that it was all because it was part of a false process. And what's amazing to me is I can now see the difference between the false and the true, because I could never accomplish anything from that. And yet I've had so many layers of antagonism, first Christianity, then the person that brought me into Christian Science was unhappy that I left the fold. My church was unhappy I left the fold. My teacher was unhappy I left the fold. So I had a lot of antagonism there. And now I come to Plainfield, and I came here with all those things behind me, very suspicious. And the truth at Plainfield has knocked off all those layers, and now I'm developing like I should have after class. And it's just a really amazing process to me.
Thank you, Mike. Good description of it all. Some of this is too hard. Some people can't bear to hear what you just said. and that's all right. They can stay in the concrete center for as long as they want to. Ears that can hear and eyes that can see, and they will get them because opinion based. Okay. Have we answered the question, Jeremy? Do you want to say?
No, I don't have any more on that. I can move on.
Okay.
Question number 2. What lesson was God imparting on Elijah as he stood upon the mount before the Lord?
That God comes to us as a still small voice, and to listen, no matter what kind of craziness is going on around us.
I think the first thing he was teaching him was to stand on the mount, not on any sense of personal feelings or whatever, but to stand with God with an elevated thought, an inspired thought that's close to God, and then you can see what needs to be seen.
I see the some kind of similarity on this with also what Jesus said later in one of the Gospels, going to the closet. I don't know if it was Jesus. Or, yes, I think it was in one of the Gospels, that going to the closet and there speak with God, to be quiet, to be separate. And so I see some kind of similarity in what it says here and on that other part too.
Thank you. We talked about that a few weeks ago, about the right way to pray in seclusion, quietness, because it is a still small voice.
Anything
Elijah,
else?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Anything else?
I was thinking about Elijah. He was feeling sorry for himself. And from what I was reading, he wasn't sent to Horeb, and God showed him through the still small voice and sent him back to Damascus to finish his job.
Thank you.
Yeah. And what happened while he was up there on the mount?
A great and strong wind rent the mountain.
Yeah.
Breaking to pieces the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind.
Anything else happen?
Let's see, there was an earthquake. Sounds like the seasons in California. Earthquake, fires, mudslides, you name it, and it happened on that mountain.
God is not in that.
No.
Yeah, one of the lessons is that God is not a God of destruction. It makes the point. There was an earthquake. There was a fire. There was a great wind. Did a lot of destruction. But it made the point that God was not in it.
Thank you.
And how?
And I think.
How did
sorry.
the author know that God was not in it?
Didn't his spiritual sense tell him?
Yes. That's
He
the
didn't
only,
hear the voice.
That's the only way. The author here is making a really profound point. When you see an earthquake, a storm, God is not in it.
Therefore, in reality, it has no power, no cause, no law, no substance. And that's how you overcome it. It is the whirlwind of mortal. There's no power in it. Not truly. What you're seeing is a aggressive mental suggestion of its reality.
And Elijah overcame his fear of all those things. He no longer, if he ever did, he didn't fear them. And that mental state prepared him for what he had to do next.
So, It's a good point. And if you ever seem to see any of these things, your own experience on the television, wherever, you can know there's no God in it. Therefore, it is powerless. That's how Mrs. Eddy would stop the storms, the earthquake, the fires. We must be doing this work ourselves. No God in it.
Therefore, no reason.
That's the practical thing of Christian Science that we were just discussing. And last night I was just reading the beginning of Herbert Eustace's book about how do we know there is a God. And it's because we know that that's the only thing we really know is that we exist. And I think that's exactly what that whole thing with Elijah describes. Then he knew that he existed with God because all that did not affect him.
Yes. You know, Mrs. Eddy would not tolerate extremes in weather. And she had people in her household working every day on the weather. And that is our guide for us to do the same and not to allow extremes of weather, certainly in our experience or in our environment. You've heard testimonies given how our church has always been spared during storms. We're working, always. And we should always be working, not just wait till you hear about it on the news, but be continually working. And when you see the peaceful, right weather that God gives, express joy and gratitude for it. Don't just take it for granted. Thank God for it. This is cementing your connection with Him and realizing how He's operating in your life on a daily basis. We take too much for granted, but we've talked about moment by moment, acknowledging the good that God is giving us. And we've had a beautiful day. We thank God for that beautiful day and know He established it for us. All that's true. It's true for all mankind. These are very important points in our work.
You know, another thing I was thinking about this question is also what lesson was God imparting on Elijah? I think in a way, you know, when you read the whole chapter and so on, what God may have been trying to say to Elijah, okay, you've been moping around, you've been feeling sorry for yourself. What doest thou here, Elijah? So, like, okay, get on and continue my work. So, in a way, he was trying to say enough of the nonsense. You believe in me. You believe that I have brought you safe up to now. So now go on and continue the work.
Thank you. Isn't it interesting, as great as Elijah was and that tremendous victory he just had over the prophets of Baal, and then he kind of fell apart. It shows that all of us are susceptible to thoughts and suggestions, or can be, and also to watch out after a great victory. He did go and he killed them all too. So anyway, he aroused the hatred of Jezebel and her ilk, and he had to deal with it. And momentarily, he thought all of those thoughts were his thoughts, but they weren't his thoughts. They were her thoughts, intent on his destruction, thoughts of animal magnetism, to defeat her, the one who had sin's revenge on its destroyer. That's what it's called, sin's revenge on its destroyer, and we must always be prepared for it. Nothing to fear when we have God with us.
Which is probably a good segue into the next.
Okay. Question 3. Why did Elijah feel he was the last godly man left alive?
He thought all the worshippers of the God, of the real God, were gone. So he thought he was the only one left.
A lot of the other true prophets had actually been killed. The false prophets were being promoted by Ahab, by Jezebel. They were spewing propaganda all over the place and threatening anybody that would oppose them. Elijah was the most revered of the true prophets. He was the most outspoken of them, and it can be very lonely at the top.
You know, when Christ was on the cross, he said, "My God, why hast thou forsaken me?"
He felt quite alone for a while.
A sense of separation, too, from God.
This is why, and we certainly have never been confronted with anything, but it's certainly why we work to keep that connection with God daily. When you feel it, when you feel you're losing it, you should be aware of it. Depression is certainly a sign you've lost it.
I mean, it's just I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's a false sense, but, you know, it comes anyway. So we have to know that we are never separated from God.
And Jesus on the cross said to the thieves that were being crucified with him, the one that said, "Don't say anything," you know, and Jesus said, "Today wilt thou be with me in paradise."
Yeah, I think he was feeling so much threat, feeling he wasn't getting any support.
So discouraging to watch the people easily fall away.
It is. And that is why Jesus wept.
And, you know, this goes on to the next question, but I know many of us at times feel very much the only one.
Can I read the next question?
Well, I remember many times Mrs. Evans felt this way too. Obviously, she knew she was leading a cause that was very vital and wanted support from her followers. And I remember times that she was feeling. And it was just a lesson for the rest of us to pull up and be supportive. Because, you know, we came here to be supportive of the right cause, and there were times when we fell down, when we should have been supporting more. But it's a lesson that needs to be learned.
Yes, yeah. It is why she started the watches, even before she knew about watches. Prayer around the clock. She needed the support. And honestly, there were many nights we would go over to her house at night. I know others will attest to that. To sit with her and talk the truth. Because she felt under such attack. And she
Derer is so good at turning the tables, because when Elijah went to Ahab and said that he needed to change, Ahab said, "Why troubleth you me?" And Elijah pointed out that he was the problem, and that was actually one of the things that happened with me when I started questioning on the estoppel clauses and having issues about not being successful with Christian Science with my teacher. One of the things that was said to me was that one of Mrs. Eddy's rules was that you had to go to the association meetings, and but that kind of went out the window now that I know that teaching isn't legal under the bylaws of the church anymore. But that's how error turns the tables on you and makes. I felt guilty till last week when I figured this out.
That's good. You're unwinding the snarl. Once you realize, well, it's whether you're going to believe she meant the estoppel clauses or not. We found out she did from what we experienced. The people in the concrete center believe that she just made a loving mistake and they just overlook all the estoppel clauses. Who are you going to serve? But you see, once you understand all this, as Mike is saying, and he's unwinding his snarls, then he's growing in his science. Otherwise, you are bound. You are bound in chains, by their chains, by the chains of the human mind. And I don't say this unkindly, because Lord knows if it hadn't been for this church, who knows, I don't know where I would have been. I probably would still be in the concrete center. I love to call it that. I don't know why I took down the beautiful park and all the trees and just slaps the men all over the place. And now they can't even afford any of it. Tell me, how is that a demonstration? Maybe that is why she wants us to study miscellany, because it tells you what a demonstration what was it, a prayer in stone.
But as much credit as we give to Elijah or Mrs. Evans, I still give a ton of credit to those people who see through it all and follow them instead of following the winds of the majority.
It takes a degree of courage and faithfulness, but again, once you see it, like saying 2 + 2 is 4, you can't go back to 2 + 2 is 5. You couldn't. How could you go back? You can't go back. There's no retrograde step in science. So
but when you find science, as I did as a grown person, I still needed help. And it became very depressing to me because I knew it was the truth, but I couldn't really practice it.
Thank you. And that's exactly how I felt.
Well, we all need help. And as we grow, we learn more and more of our help comes directly to us from God. There are times when it's helpful to have someone watching our back. And that's what a good church does.
And the brotherhood, you can't been taught you can't love God if you don't love your brother. We need each other. It's a great thing, the love we have for each other.
I started calling a lot of people in the journal. I would just pick up the phone and call various people. I'd call someone who was the president of the church or something like that up in Boston. And he was very nice to me. I can't remember his name, but he was well known. Just trying to find someone who could help me.
Right. Well, it's partly why I went to school in Boston and went to the Mother Church Sunday School. I was looking too. And many are searching. So, and we keep praying and knowing that those who are right will find their way here. And we will get into much more tomorrow at the round table about the remnant. And we have been answering number 4 as we've been going along. I'm kind of aware of that. I don't know if there's anyone else who wants to add to that now.
Question 4. How is this story relevant to our lives now?
I kept thinking that one with God is majority. So even if you're alone, if you can think that, it can help lift you.
Thank you. And that was beautiful. I think it was Elizabeth wrote on the forum, and I'll have you read that tomorrow at the round table, Elizabeth, which she brought that out about the remnant. One with God is a majority, always. Thank you.
I also think that it's relevant because when, if we, and like some other people have said before too, that once you know Christian Science, it's like that God writes in your inward parts. You know that this is the truth, and you desperately try to get more information. And like the Fairly said, you start calling people. Can you help me? Like trying to find more information about it, or to validate what you know it is the truth that is inside you, and and it's pushing you to find out. And it's something that once you know about it, Christian Science and what it does and what it is, and Mrs. Eddy, it's just not going to let you rest until you know the truth and you follow it.
Thank you. And what we're going to read tomorrow about the remnant, that's one of the descriptions of the remnant. You have this, something in you that you know is the truth. Sometimes you're not even aware of where you first heard it, but you know it's the truth, and you can't let it go.
Oh, it doesn't let you go, I think.
And that's why our church does what it does. we work to make the website as easy for people to find as possible. And Benjamin first heard of us when he was visiting brother, and he found a copy of, and his brother didn't know where he got it, where it came from.
He didn't believe it. I don't even know if he read it.
He didn't read it, was attracted to it, and read it, and felt something really good coming from it, and contacted us. That's how Benjamin got here. So we never know where our articles go. We never know where the internet, the website is, but we trust that God.
The Lord gives the increase. Anyone else?
Well, I just wanted to say one of the things I thought was relevant about this story, just to my life, is it's really a heartening thing to know that, you know, Elijah did these great things, and even he had things to learn. So when something comes along and I got to learn it, it's hard to really feel bad about it. just get going through it. So grateful for that.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
An eternal learning, I think.
Yeah. And someone wise once said that, you know, when I know everything there is to know, I will have ascended. You won't be able to. So we all have things to learn.
Also, the harder the lesson, the bigger the blessing.
And I'm going back and forth in different moods, but if I take the book for reading the lyrics of some songs, or I reread something from what we talked about, the Bible lesson or the round table, it really comforts me. And and this not feeling alone is so important, because with many things we are alone and nobody can really help us because they don't know better than we do. And so having this comforting literature and music is just wonderful.
Thank you, Ute.
That's Ute in Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad. I'm always looking forward to the session. Thank you so much, Kenneth, that I can participate.
It's wonderful that you can, yes. And we thank Jeremy for all that he does for all of this communicating and having such a sterling website. Okay, well, we will talk more about the remnant at the round table.
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Me.